and welcome to another episode with Theo Smith, Neurodiversity with Theo and Friends. Another episode where we get to kind of deep dive into some of these life experiences, what neurodiversity, neuroinclusion means to them, their passions, their enthusiasm for this incredible topic, when it hit them like a light bulb. And today we have Jeremy Davis joining us. And how I came about Jeremy was through the wonderful world of LinkedIn, that place I spend far too much time, if I'm honest with you. But he creates incredible content and videos like no other. And there's nothing like somebody coming across in a way that seems completely new and fresh and inspiring, and actually talking about a topic in a really accessible way. And for far too long, we've had to listen to experts talk about the topic in such a complex way that it's not accessible for us all. So I absolutely love the way that Jeremy brought his personality, his expertise, brilliance to these beautiful videos. And we'll talk some more about that a little later on. But first of all, I would like to welcome Jeremy. Jeremy, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience? Give them a little insight to who you are, what you do.
Well, thanks for having me. So currently, as you said, I make content around disability. That's one of several facets of how I spend my days. I'm also a disability representation consultant. So I work with novelists or filmmakers. I work with big tech companies, and helping them ensure that, number one, they are doing disability representation, and number two, that representation is equitable. And then beyond that, my passion has always been filmmaking and writing and directing stories that have that disability representation in them, of just my own stories. So that's how I spend my days.
Incredible. And tell us a little bit about the early days then, Jeremy. What was young Jeremy like? What were you doing? Did it come to you kind of as something that you were very excited about?
Yeah. Well, I'm a North Kentucky Okie Iowan. So I was born in North Carolina, moved to Kentucky, moved to Oklahoma, moved to Ohio, and lived in several places in each. I had a hard time moving around, making friends, and all growing up, I didn't understand that I was disabled. I had a lot of health issues. I had social interaction issues, which I had always kind of equated to perpetually being the new guy. But then it wasn't until later in life, until recently, that I got my autism diagnosis and was like, oh, I think and interact differently. And so lots of light bulbs went off. I had a complex growing up. And in 7th grade, I had realized some patterns that I had seen in my life of, like, I was always diving into story in whatever form it took. So novels or TV or movies. Excuse me. And I just loved storytelling. And I saw the impact that stories had in my life to keep my head above water with my depression, with the stress that I was under in my life, etc. And I decided that I wanted to be a writer and director of movies, because not only was I seeing the impact that stories have in my life, I also saw that stories could impact society and culture to make it a better place for everybody. And in typical autistic fashion, I've had a one-track mind ever since. That's been my hyper focus, and I've loved having that as my hyper focus, because literally every other hyper focus can tie into filmmaking. If I have a hyper focus on, I don't know, the thing that pops into my head is the Titanic, which I don't have a hyper focus on, but it popped into my head.
You do now.
Right. but if I did, I could make, like James Cameron's Titanic, with all the detail and everything that he put into it. And I'm not trying to insinuate that he's autistic, but like any subject matter, I could make a film about, tell a story about, and explore that hyperfixation until that hyperfixation is satisfied, or maybe it continues on and it continues to be a theme. So yeah, I got into filmmaking, and in 7th grade I started volunteering at the local radio station, etc. And went to college eventually, not right after 7th grade, but
How old are you at 7th grade? What's the age there?
Oh gosh. So I was a year or two younger than everybody else. Let's see. I graduated high school when I was 17. So do the math. Which I'm not good at. So, yeah.
No. It just interestingly the journey into filmmaking and writing. I'm just thinking of my own journey and connection. My connections came with drama when I was about 10, I think, and some of the first experiences around speech and language, that it helped me with that. But also, I'm fascinated what you're talking about there about the ability to write in this instance and think about production of film. Do you think that started your early years experiences of being able to understand how to fit in, right? What other people may have thought and felt like by reading and writing. And do you think that frames some of maybe what was the masking or however you want to define it, right? That led you all through your life up to the point of where it was like, I wouldn't even know I'm autistic because I've been doing all these other things for so long. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, and that's definitely a lens that I can put on now to look back. At the time, I had no idea. And so something that I noticed and was pointed out to me, both for good and for bad, is whenever I, for example, watched a movie or consumed any story, I, without trying, would be acting like the main character for a good period of time until that vibe kind of wore off. So if I watched a Bond movie, which I don't remember if I was watching Bond in 7th grade or if that was later, but I remember watching a Bond movie, and then like for a good while afterwards, I'd be just being Bond and not even trying to emulate him. I was just that. I remember, I'm pretty sure that it came out when I was in 7th grade, Home Alone. And my parents banned me from watching it because I started acting like Kevin McAllister. Which, fair, but also, yeah, that sucks. So, yeah, I don't know if that was like a natural masking thing or I don't even know if there's a word for it, but with echolalia, where you repeat what you hear, like I was repeating a personality. And I think I did that a lot with my relationships. So with my friends, I would be mirroring what they were doing and not thinking about it, not doing any of that. So that would be an interesting, investigation into what was going on in my psyche at the time. Was that a psychological coping mechanism, or is this something with autistic people that happen? One theory that I have, I don't know if you've heard of mirror neurons, but mirror neurons are very fascinating. And it's where you have neurons in your system, and some people have more mirror neurons than others that pick up on other people's things. And this is where like theories of ESP come in, where it's like, I'm getting a vibe here, and then you find out your vibe is right. I came across mirror neurons on an article about a doctor who seemed to have this superpower where he would walk into a room and he would go, "Oh, you're having something going on with your liver." He would physically feel what the other person was experiencing and would be able to diagnose people who had been misdiagnosed or hadn't been able to get a diagnosis with whatever medical problem that they had. And they discovered that he had a lot of mirror neurons. And I'm like, huh, I wonder if that's true for a lot of autistic people, that we have a lot of mirror neurons. Or maybe a different presentation of autism has a lot fewer than normal, and that's why some people can't connect with others. Anyway, just a fascinating thought experiment that I play with.
And that really resonates with me. And I just want to pick up on a point there that you mentioned, because I find it fascinating. And I'm always learning new things about myself. And this is why this is wonderful to share it with others, right? Because somebody says something and you say mirror neurons, and somebody will be listening going, what? That's what it is. Or that. And they could go off on their own tangent into their deep diving into that concept, right? Which is lovely. But there's something in one of your videos that you were talking about, and it's the embrace autism, and you were talking about the self-diagnosis, which I love, right? And the it's valid, right? But what you did that was really important there is you highlighted an embraceautism.com site where people can go and take some tests that are all in one place, and I'll give you the validity of them and like score and what have you, and tell you which test to take next. So I just quickly did 2 of those tests before I jumped on, right? Just fascinated so that we could talk about it. And one was the AQ10, and I scored a 5, right? And it says score 6 or above and you may well be autistic, or there's chances of, or please explore more type thing. Well, I scored a 5 and it was a 6. And even then I was like, no, was it a 5? It might have been a 3 or a 4 in reality. But then it said, if you mask a lot or you're later diagnosed, whatever, try the CAT-Q next. I tried the CAT-Q and I scored 144. Now, for an autistic man, an average for an autistic man is 109.64. So even for me, I was like, yeah, because it just, the first one is almost like when you take a child. When I took my daughter, and the girl, my daughter, it doesn't make sense because it's all boy stuff, right? In the UK, it's all like, boy, does she line up dinosaurs? Does she know the name of all the stars or planets or whatever? Like, no, she doesn't know any of them, right? So she's not autistic. Well, she is, right? And it's the same with this. I found that fascinating, and it what you're talking about there exactly is the point for me, which is I'm exceptionally good, and it sounds you are as well, of if you're with somebody, like mirroring the mood, mirroring the way that they are, mirroring what's going on in the room. And actually that can be really powerful for being able to work with people, right? Being able to work in film and understand people and the journey, and in acting or in recruitment and HR, working with people, being able to walk into a room and mirror what's going on, we now know to be very powerful. People train to be able to do that. Whereas what you're mentioning there is it's a natural, innate ability. Oh, some people train. We have it by right. Yet often we don't utilize it. We underutilize these skills. So I just wanted to jump in because your video on that was brilliant. So people could come find it because it's in your LinkedIn profile at the top, which is self-diagnosis. I think you title it something like "Isn't Valid," but it is. Yeah.
Right.
So just your thoughts on that, really. I know I've just explained, but it's just because it triggered a lot with me. And then when you mentioned it there, what are your thoughts about that? Where does some of this content come from on that basis? And how you get into it?
Well, I'll point out one thing that came to mind while you were talking, and one of my theories with mirror neurons for people who have a lot of them. Again, I want to reiterate, this is a theory, my own headcanon thing. That those who have a lot of mirror neurons may also find social situations to be incredibly draining, especially the more people there are, or especially if those people aren't people that they've had relationships with where trust has been built. Because you're going like, I'm feeling a lot of different things from a lot of different people. And then you have alexithymia because you can't filter out your own emotions from theirs. And so it gets challenging. But yes, like doing the acting and directing. I do acting as well, more for fun for myself. But yeah, like if anybody ever asks, like, "Oh, you're so good at acting. What do you do?" It's like, well, it's my autism. I've been acting my whole life. Um, but yeah, so in terms of my content, I do the acting as well. When I started the content, I had been doing social media content since 2009, so only a couple years after YouTube began. And I was always doing it for other people. I've helped several channels blow up and do well. And then after the pandemic hit, and I wasn't doing that work for anybody at the time, I had to take a couple years to decompress. I was really burnt out. But then in 2022, I wanted to just make some videos for myself. There were some subjects that I hadn't come across anywhere on social media. Not saying that they weren't on there, but I'm like, I don't see this really talked about. And I did it as a form of self-therapy to externalize the things that were bothering me, to get it off my chest. And I wasn't planning on, you know, doing it as a thing. Just like, I know how to do this. I want to create scenes where I play a couple characters and process through. And then my first video got 15,000 views. So, um, so as I create content, it's really easy to fall into the trap of trying to get views. And like, as a coach before, I was like, hey, don't do that. You've got to find blah blah. And then when you're doing it for your own stuff, you're like, oh my gosh, like the last 5 videos have gotten like piddly views. I need to do, and then you start chasing that, and then the videos aren't as good. It doesn't resonate as well, and yeah. And so I try not to look at the response, because some of the best videos and the most important videos, in my opinion, that I've made have not gotten very many views. But I keep returning back to, I'm making it because I feel that it needs said. And so now it's been said, and I can say it again if I need to, but like, I can move on and keep going. And so I am always pulling from things that are coming up in my life. So self-diagnosis, I was diagnosed autistic. Let's see, it's 2024 now, so I guess, yeah, it wasn't last year, it was the year before. I had just turned 40. And I got my official diagnosis, and I had been self-diagnosed for a year before that. And you hear things about the invalid, that self-diagnosis is invalid, and I get comments and stuff on my content saying that kind of thing. And so I'm like, I need to address this. And there's other creators that I follow that also cover this content as well. I try to do unique stuff and not necessarily pull too much inspiration from what other people are talking about, though that happens naturally as well. I want to make sure that it's deeply resonating within me, and I'm not just like mirroring somebody else's content. So yeah, I was like, well, wait a minute. Self-diagnosis was a part of my diagnosis journey. And like, if I didn't have that, I probably wouldn't have gotten the official diagnosis. And then also seeing all the pitfalls of getting the diagnosis, which I lucked out with the speed that I was able to get my diagnosis with. And the person who evaluated me actually listened, because I brought in I took those quizzes on Embrace Autism and I printed them out and I brought them in, and her response was, wow, these are a whole lot more rigorous than
what we do.
our evaluation that we use from the DSM-5. So you don't seem like, she didn't say it outright, but it was obvious that she's like, on the surface, you don't seem to be autistic, but you're pointing out all these things that happen outside of the office. So I guess you are. So yeah, and so when I'll get a subject matter like that I'm like, I want to talk about that, then with a lot of things, it requires some research. And so I look into what are some other things that I haven't necessarily experienced. So with getting the autism diagnosis versus self-diagnosis, I was looking into other creators, their experiences. And of course, like, I'm a white male presenting person. So hearing stories of women's experiences or people of color, all those kinds of things. And so I am intentional in trying to integrate those perspectives as best that I can into the stories that I'm telling. And then also learning about, like, if you get a diagnosis of autism, there's several countries that you can't like either get a green card or citizenship in. So that was like mind-blowing to me that I didn't even know. So yeah, I make every video a little bit of a hyperfixation and share what I've learned. And then usually I learn twice as much from the comments after I've made the video. And I'm like, well, dang it, now I need to make another one because I missed some stuff or I was incorrect there. But yeah, and that is one thing that I want to bring up is oftentimes people see a video and they treat it as if the video needs to be the end all resource for all things on that subject matter, and they're like, oh, you made a mistake and I'm gonna you in the comments. And it's just like, that's not helpful. It's super draining to the creator who's trying to do good, and it's not constructive criticism. So I have to deal with that a lot, and that's one of the biggest deterrents for me to make content. It drains me significantly, is people just hopping in the comments and not having an equitable conversation. And like, I'm learning and making mistakes. I'm not the supreme all-knowing expert. You know? But yeah, so I've changed perspectives on several things because of things that I've learned in my comments, and I try to make follow-up videos that correct for that. And that's why I talk about my content as it being an ongoing conversation.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And it really connects with me around the people commenting, because as somebody who posts quite a lot, variety of different content, and I have done for a long time on LinkedIn, I get that as well. And actually, I got it not so much at the moment. There was a period, I don't know whether it was 12 months ago or something like that, where the neurodiversity movement community kind of crossed over a lot more than perhaps it is now. Like, all different facets and aspects of the neurodiversity conversation started to cross over, and it was as if the conversation had to be the truest form of the conversation. But the challenge for me is, I'm not an advisor into public services. I'm not a health advisor that will catch somebody who is literally at the bottom end of their mental health and well-being and need intervention. But all of this stuff goes way beyond me. I'm not an academic researcher or a surgeon or I'm not all these things. I am Theo, and you are Jeremy, and therefore sometimes that becomes quite difficult when the comments don't account for that. and the way I see it is that, you know, we need writers of all different skills and types, as we need content producers, as you know, we need an ADHD or autistic judge, as we need a solicitor, as we need a police officer, as we need a prison officer, as we will have prisoners, and you know, and the variety ensures that hopefully we can reduce the amount of ADHD prisoners, for example, because there's far too many. And but we only do that through having variety across all aspects of that. So if we diminish the voice of those people in those areas because, you know, they're not up to the quality of all those different areas, then we're only going to have representation in very small areas, which is something that really concerns me. So all the power to you.
Thank you. It's unfortunate, but I see a lot of policing going on by a certain facets of the disability advocacy sphere, and like, oh, you can't use this word, or you have to do it this way. And like, there is truth behind what they're saying, but it's the way that it's presented. And like, there's also a lack of listening of other perspectives. It's like, okay, well, that word may in definition, specifically the way it was created, mean that, but that's not how I experience it. That's not how it's been reflected to me in my life. And so we can do education to say, well, for those interactions in my life, that's not how this word is, but also that word doesn't resonate with me. And I would like a different term, or any number of different things. And so I've experienced some pretty hard, challenging interactions with other advocates when I was like, especially early on, before I was making content even, I was like asking questions. And I had one particular pretty well-known advocate, who I'm not going to name, jump into my DMs and just tear me a new one because I asked a question about a particular term that I was confused on. And they called me a tame autistic who was attempting to colonize the neurodiversity movement. I'm like, I asked a question for clarification. I'm autistic. Like, and so I see a lot of this, and it's frustrating because, and it's something that I try to remind myself on, and how I approach my content is, nobody voted for me. I am a self-appointed...
I vote for you.
Well, thank you. But like, I am a self-appointed advocate, and the disability space, even just the neurodiversity space, is diverse. And that's in perspective and everything like that. And there's a lot of ableist perspectives. And so when I'm doing my content, I'm trying to frame it in conversations. And yes, I'm presenting my perspective, but I'm always trying to present it as a perspective, not as a definitive, this is... It's like, well, this is how I feel. This is how this word affects me, or how I perceive it. Or this is how this situation, etc. And so on the one side, you have these advocates who are on the one extreme of like very authoritative or authoritarian, or like, this is how you have to use the word, and if you're not using the word that way, you're doing damage, and like going after people. And I'm not just talking like going, like, if they come into my comments and be like, hey, you're saying this wrong, okay, cool, let's have a conversation. But I'm saying they're going after people who are not content creators, who are not advocates, going like, you're doing, and that's, you're not winning anybody over. But then you have people on the other side who are actual advocates who are presenting very ableist perspectives as well. Again, I'm not going to name names. There's a particular autistic advocate who has worked with Netflix. And I go and look at their content, and they're posting very ableist perspectives of autism and things that I'm just like, that does not represent me. And no wonder that show is the way it is, because they were the consultant on it. And so I have to go, when I'm doing my content, I know I'm not representing everyone. So how can I represent equitably those people who disagree with me and give everyone the opportunity to hear what I have to say and make their own decision? So it's a big burden, and
It is.
I don't always hit the mark, but I keep on trying to bring myself back to that center of like, okay, I am presenting a perspective, and I know my perspective has changed so dramatically on a number of issues throughout my life. I want to make the content on this perspective now that I would be proud of, even if I change in the future, and that fosters discussion so that we can all improve together.
Absolutely. I think it's fun, and I think it's easy to watch and understand, and that's really important with the ever complexity that can surround this topic. The multiple characters that you play, I think deals with some of what you're talking about there, to try and deal with what the other person may say. That person that drops into your DMs, for example, you can play that character and you do it well, where you've got all these different characters that go, I'm autistic and I've got anxiety, and got next person going, I'm autistic and I got nothing but happiness and energy and love people and like going to places with bright lights and not. And I just love that the particular video there. And when you did this is, I think that you did this is what we mean by autism as well. That particular video. And then I'm just kind of giving people notes of, I can put the links in as well to the show, but the masking and apes, which was lovely, where you're talking about landing on Planet of the Apes. It's almost like I can imagine you going off with like the Titanic. You're going, wait, I'm going to talk about, being the different species. Where am I going to go with this? Space, Planet of the Apes,
Right?
Which was brilliant. So I think that the way that you create a lot of that content, I find to be really accessible for anybody who wants to kind of explore the topic and just get a sense of how wide and varied it is. I think that's something that's really important. And nobody owns this, right? Although some people may feel that they do, they don't. Nobody can own language on that basis, especially the English language, which I find hysterically funny. My wife is academically brilliant. She is a genius in language, English language, and she is my. I go to her for all things, and if she ever told me, Theo, you must use this word, I would use it. But I've never heard that from her. So I like on that basis, words evolve, they change, they're dynamic. The English language has so many rules that are broken every 5 seconds. It has more words than any other language by far. Therefore, specifically within the context of the English language, I think we can't really say what the rules are, right? The parameters around it. But what we need is accessibility for all. And somebody who's also, like me, who's dyslexic, I find it really difficult that people say there's a law around the way I say things, which words I use, how I use them, and how I write. When if you want to define it as a disability in that context, which they may well do, I therefore have significant challenges around writing and spelling and grammar and understanding words. And therefore, by policing the words that I use, you're putting barriers up to me being able to communicate and understand and engage with the world. Boom. Yeah. That's exactly what we're trying to say we should not be doing, right? Exactly. We're disabling people because we say that they have to speak themselves in a very precise manner, which is impossible. Exactly like
Yeah.
asking somebody who's autistic, you must look people in the eye. You must go into a big, busy room with bright lights and just deal with it, because everybody has to do that. The English language can't be messed with. The way that humans engage with people can't be messed with. Rubbish! Rubbish. So just adding like weight of credibility to what you're saying, because I really buy into that concept and the way that you deliver your content. So hats off.
Thank you. Thank you.
So what does the future look like for you then, in terms of taking this forwards? What else would you like to do? How else? Because I think the danger is, I've also seen a lot of people, for some of the reasons you've mentioned as well, who have incredible ability to get the message out there, great ability to connect people together, like community. But the problem with that is it can be, people can take different sides of the fence, right? But that is natural human nature. We can't please everybody. And so I've seen people drop off, people come into the space, people do really well, make a real positive impact, and then just vanish. And I guess, this is me being reflective of myself as well, I guess. How do we move forwards with this? How do you move forward to the rest of us to ensure that we don't burn out doing the exact thing? We're trying to help people stop burning out in their lives, in their workplace, better understand themselves so they can look after themselves. How do you continue this journey and ensure that you continue to do this great work? And what does that look like for you in the future, you think?
I don't know what the future holds. You're asking me to tell the future? Come on.
Yes. It's a minute in. Come on.
Yeah. Burnout is definitely a huge concern with creating this kind of content long term. And because of the things that I've already talked about, it's something that I struggle with on a regular basis. I haven't made a single video. Well, I haven't posted a single video this year. I started making one yesterday, and I posted a video towards the end of last year, and I had another autistic creator tear it apart and misquote it and completely misrepresent me. And it really affected me. They had a much larger following than I did, or I do. And so a lot of their followers came into my comments and were just spouting off the misrepresentation that she said. And yeah, it's been really hard to make another video after that. I had already made a few videos, and I made some videos in response to like process through some of that, and then so it's really unfortunate that people take that kind of approach when responding to somebody, that it's not trying to have a conversation. It's, you're wrong and you're stupid and you're, so, but the problem is that the internet is full of those people, both creators and randos, for lack of a better word, in the comments. And so I know in continuing to make content, that's just a reality. So when I have those kinds of experiences, I have to take time for myself. And I can't control other people. I made a response video that was like trying to both set boundaries, but also facilitate conversation. And she hopped into the comments on that one and was just like, ah! And I'm just like, I can't. So I had to block her because I was having a major trauma response, which I said I was having a major trauma response in the video. So yeah, it's a reality of the field. And my future goals and plans are to work in film and TV. So like I'm currently in the fundraising phase of a feature film that I've written and will be directing. So I'm approaching investors to shoot that this summer, and putting my screenplays and things like that out there. You can tell that I'm recalling that memory is breaking my brain. I'm trying to reboot here. But so yeah, I'm wanting to do that filmmaking work that I've wanted to do since 7th grade, because the content that I make reaches a particular audience. The core audience is going to be people already who are autistic, ADHD, disabled, who are in that sphere or on the fringes of that sphere, and that may bring people into the community who are on the edges. But it's not really going to connect with Joe Schmo in society. It does make a huge impact and does a lot of good, but my films are targeted to, I don't know if Joe Schmo is the best word, but all the Joe Schmoes and Jane Does and that have no connection or even awareness of the disability stuff, and addresses so the kinds of stories that I typically write are epic action adventures that take place in a fantasy or sci-fi realm. Obviously the feature film that I'm working on is a small independent production, so it's much more grounded. It's the story of it's inspired by my story of having to go no contact with my parents, specifically my dad, and how the trauma in that relationship had caused some of my disabilities. But typically it's action adventures, those kinds of things that resonate with a very large audience. They just happen to have some disabled people in them. And in having disabled people in them, those disabled people have to face the ableism within the fantastical societies that are depicted, which then makes the audience go, oh, parallel to here. And in watching movies or TV shows, people are having a bit of a lived experience because they're experiencing this fantastical world through the eyes of the main character. And I really believe that lived experience is the best way to get people to dismantle their internalized ableism and to see things differently, and just representation of like, oh, disabled people exist and they're just people. And that's really my passion. I want to create these stories that exist throughout the whole of culture that can shift the needle of addressing ableism systemically. And then also, in addition, create the social media videos that I do so that people who like see my film go, I want to see more. And like, who is this Jeremy Yahoo? And then they watch my videos and they learn more, hopefully, and some will reject it, and that's fine too. I'll get more haters. So whatever. Yeah. That's what I'm hoping my future holds and what I'm striving towards. And then kind of the in between those two, I'm continuing to do the disability representation consulting for projects that are not my own, so that other people can also be allies in writing novels or any of the different mediums of creating equitable disability representation.
Brilliant. That sounds incredible. And I think just listening there, that sounds like some really valid work to be working towards and getting involved in, and help focus the mind away from some of the kind of the toxic engagement feelings, emotions that can exist when people feel that they have the right to start to kind of steamroll over somebody without the full context or understanding of what's going on. There's something I've just been thinking about myself. There's this process that you can go through with rubbish dumps, very toxic rubbish dumps, extracting the energy that is created through the gases of these rubbish dumps and what have you. And I just think maybe there's
Yeah.
something in that for you and I from some of these toxic experiences. It is actually positive energy that can be extracted
Yeah.
from them. If
It's fuel.
and not always possible, but if we can kind of construct a place where we cannot let it get through
Yeah.
to the deeper parts of our psyche and our emotions, which is not always easy.
Yeah, that's the challenge. It's something that I have struggled with my whole life. Like getting bullied as a kid, I kept on just going like, how do I make this not emotionally affect me? Like on a logical level, I can process through the rationalization of not letting it affect me, but my emotions are still doing their thing. And I've learned different ways that I can process through those emotions. And I have numerous different types of therapies that I do. And one of my therapists is a neuromuscular therapist that is retraining the nervous system. And it has been so transformative to my life. Because the healthier my nervous system gets, the more balanced my nervous system gets, the more the emotional stuff doesn't affect me. But I also have to acknowledge where I am of going, oh, well, this is where I am with how I'm responding to things. And so, for example, when that individual made her video in response to mine, she had said several things in there on different subjects, including I think it was dude. It was like a condescending, like, yeah, dude. I forget exactly what she said. And so that spurred some commentary in the comments, and that inspired me to make a clarifying video about, like, I'm non-binary and I say any what is the word? He, she, they, it, those things. You can use any of those. And so when pronouns, thank you. That word. So when I said, hey, please don't condescend to me with a gendered term, she was like, well, you say any pronouns. And I'm like, okay, you can use any pronouns if you're speaking to me respectfully. But if you're being condescending, like, call me an asshole. Don't use a gendered pronoun. That is incredibly triggering to tie gender to, like that's anti-trans, that's anti-LGBTQIA, that's it's not equitable. So I made a video explaining how, like, yeah, if you walk up to me and be like, hey dude, that's fine, but you can't use that. There's distinction there. So that created a lot more conversation and understanding for people watching that video and engaging in the comments, to help. But I had to go through the pain of experiencing it to capture those gases from the refuse, and harness them. And so, like, I'm sure if you're a worker who is capturing those gases to use, you're being exposed to toxic gas. Like, you have to be in the refuse pile. It's not fun. I hope you're getting paid a lot of money to do that. I myself am not getting paid enough to deal with this kind of bullying and trauma, but, like, I have to look at it in terms of I'm getting paid through the relationships, the positive things that I'm getting, and the positive impacts that I'm making. Because the money is not there's some money involved, but it's not what people think.
No. Oh, listen, I found that really powerful, actually, just sharing that experience as
Yeah.
well, because I think just in
Thank you
explaining
for
to
that
people,
metaphor. That's really helpful.
yeah, listen, I'm mindful of it myself, and one thing I noticed as we wrap up today's show,
Yeah.
it's the other difficult thing is there's a lot of vulnerability out there, and what I found is, um, we do have a responsibility as creators, to for the wider world, and to do our best and to create content with as much knowledge and expertise as we can muster, and keeping us true to ourselves, which I like, like creating something that we can stand by, right? You can be inspired by other people, but thinking, no, 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 this is something that's deep in me. And I think if we do that, that's really important. But what I've noticed is some of the followers, some of the engagement that you get is from people who are sometimes very vulnerable as well. And when I've had some really negative experiences of people commenting and stuff, and I've challenged them in the best positive way that I can,
Yeah.
and gone, well, where's this coming from? Why so aggressive? Okay,
Yeah.
can we explore this? And when I've gone down that road and then seen more engagement over time, and then explored their profile, their background, what I've tend to have found is there's a lot of vulnerability there with some of those individuals, and they are hanging on to something with a particular follower, but with a particular creator, where the creator, they dependent on their behavior, maybe then spilling into that whole community,
Yeah.
and they're not fully aware then of the real impact they're having, because they may then walk away from that conversation not knowing there's an army of 100 people continuing that conversation on aggressive. And I think we all need to be mindful of that, right? All as creators. But I think there's definitely within the disability space, the inclusion space, that because there's so much, and you see in the political space as well, right?
Yeah.
Because there's so much feeling and pain and trauma and experience and commitment, right? It can create very hostile, negative environments already face trauma, and then it's an argument over whose trauma is biggest, right? And that's not a place we want to be. That's not. No,
No.
no, 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 no. We want to lift people up and out. We don't want to be pushing people back in.
Yeah.
But so please, last words of wisdom. Where can people find you? Any final thoughts as we bring this to a close, Jeremy? It's been a real pleasure, by the way.
Likewise, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you for having me on. You can find me on the internet. So I'm on numerous social media platforms. If you go to my website, jeremyandrewdavis.com, you can find each of the social media platforms that I post on. I usually post all of the same videos to each, but each platform also has some different things on it. Like I'll share some things to Facebook or Instagram or whatever that I don't share elsewhere. So follow me everywhere.
Yes.
That also helps me as a creator to show a larger following when I'm trying to make connections and that kind of thing. But yeah, and then also on my jeremyandrewdavis.com website, you can peruse some of the short films that I've made. You can look at some of the screenplays that I've written. Not the whole screenplay. You get a little blurb of what it's about. So if you want to check those out, those are on the site as well. And then, yeah, I'd be grateful for anybody to come look at my content and engage and spread the word.
Brilliant. So that's lovely. And anybody with deep pockets, go and give Jeremy some money to make the film. And I'll share some links in the description so that you can go and find Jeremy on LinkedIn and what have you. And also, I think there's just a real sense and feeling from this conversation of just, be kind. You don't know the journey that somebody's taken. You can listen to the podcast and find out a bit about Jeremy. But as you could hear towards the end of this, there is a greater level of depth of experience that exists that often we don't share. And we shouldn't have to share that. And we shouldn't have to give all of ourselves all of the time. If we're really just trying to make a positive difference in the world, and really help others through our own experiences, and actually making sense of the world ourselves almost live. I think is a very vulnerable place to be. And not enough people are doing it. So therefore, we should really cherish the people who are and value individual experiences. So thank you, Jeremy, for being you and for doing the work that you do. And it's an
Likewise.
absolute pleasure to be on.